Hi, welcome to my show today. And this one's a little different because Andre and I are taping it before we're doing it. I'm actually learning how to edit videos. Not that I'm going to cut out a golden word that Andre speaks, but I got to practice somehow. And one of the questions I posed to Andre was he and I like to talk about things that are more in the broader spiritual sense of how astrology works. And I've had a master class in uh, Georgian to Victorian Britain, which is probably now everybody's turning their show off, right? Bleh. But this is what happened in Britain. But this is a quick summary between 1850 and 1890. Mass migration and the total loss of its rural identity, new urban crises caused by that, social upheaval and class struggle, loss of all rural traditions. And I really got master class in that because that's what drove the elementals underground, which is another thing I do. Environment and health disasters were really common during that period of time. But these disruptions that happened led to our modern labor laws, social welfare, and eventual political empowerment of the working class if it can hold on to it. And I what I wanted to talk to you about was, the planets are all out there, and granted, our planets are hitting against the US charts in a particular way. But Britain was in a different kind of turmoil during the Civil War. It was going through a mass industrialization. It went from having almost no rails in 1830s to having the entire country hooked up by the 1860s. And if you think about that, that's like what's happened with us and the internet. All of a sudden, everybody was there and they could create a mass mail system. So I wanted to talk to Andre about how these major planets shifting into these positions sped up that entire sense of growth. I'm old. I remember when your family could have the same old black Bakelite phone in the basement for 15 years, you know, unlike now where everybody has to have the neatest, newest phone that not only is it a phone, I don't think people hardly ever use them to call each other, but it's everything else. And so for me, there's been this massive acceleration I've viewed in my life. So I want to bring Andre on to see if his world can enlighten me more about that because Terrell will just say, yeah, it's happening, live with it, but that's not as good an answer.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, so well, there you mentioned charts. If you have country charts that seem to work, by checking to see where the planets are, the kind of events that take place. Uh, for the US, there is one such chart that a lot of astrologers use. It's called the Sibley chart.
Mm-hmm.
I actually haven't focused a whole lot on the UK chart, but I'm sure there is. There's probably a chart for the UK. I think the chart that is most talked about is a Capricorn sun, but I'll look into that. That's a
Okay.
good reminder, particularly because Britain is again in another important period, pretty obviously now as well. But irrespective of charts, there are also the planets themselves. They operate for everybody in the sense that they are there, wherever they
Mm-hmm.
are in the solar system at that time, and you can correlate things and to them. The world history. In fact, there have been astrologers that were not particularly interested in personal astrology, which has been more my thing since I started. But they would focus more on that and come up with some really good correlations, like that French guy Andre Barbeau, my namesake. He figured out
Mm-hmm.
there would be a pandemic many years before it happened. He talked about it in 2011, for example, based on where the planets were and so forth,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, but if you look at that, where planets are, and in this case also, what time, when were they discovered? Because the modern era is actually well defined by the discovery of the planets beyond Saturn. Up to the 1782, there were
Mm-hmm.
not enough instruments to see. Uranus you can't see with the naked eye. Saturn is a planet that you still can look in the sky, and if you know where it is, especially, you can point to it. It looks like a little, a more kind of a faded star, where Jupiter is a lot brighter and it's really
Mm-hmm.
obvious. But the ancients from long, long ago knew about Saturn and were already, astrologers were already correlating what was happening and they knew about it. Uranus is discovered, and this is something where, as I understand astrology, it'll have something to do with the world where it's at, human consciousness, all of that uh, takes the form of that time. And you see how reflective Uranus is in by what was then discovered about it, because at the time the planet is discovered, astrologers would take a while, to come up with, well, what is this planet doing, and they would notice certain things, and over decades and decades, you build up a kind of an encyclopedia of this planet seems to be related to whatever, such and such, right?
Mm-hmm.
But either way, the planet is discovered, and it's right on the doorstep of two big things that are happening. One is, if you look at the American experiment, it happens right around the same time. America is formed in 1776, but really they were still working on
Oh,
it into the
they messed
1780s.
with it forever. It wasn't until the 1780s that they had an idea.
Exactly, exactly. So they're doing this thing, and then also the Industrial Revolution is about to happen. That's more 1790 or so. So we're in this zone, and Uranus, as I understand it, is the planet that will promote democracy, because Uranus, and this was something that took a while to figure out. And I remember at first resisting it because I thought, this planet, I don't know, Aquarius, I thought maybe it could fit better somewhere else. But as I looked at it more and more, it's a really good correlation, because Aquarius is the power of the individual within the group. So that's what democracy is.
Mm-hmm.
The ideal democracy gives people free speech, lots of rights. There's a sense we're a group and we do all for one and one for all. That's ideally
Right.
not what the current president thinks it should be, but that's what it tries to.
Well, they're all for one as long as it's him. I mean,
Exactly, right. So Uranus enters the scene, which, and another thing about Uranus is it's revolutionary. It has a quality of leave the past behind. There is some turbulence, even chaos. Then we create a new reality. So, on that alone, if you take that planet and then you realize it has an 84-year cycle, that's something you can measure because you can see it, through a telescope, comes back
mm-hmm.
84 years. So, the first return of its discovery, when it was first seen, happens during the American Civil War, which then tells you, well, that's probably you, at least in part unique to America. But as you were telling me prior to, we're talking, you and I, and you were comparing notes, and you said, that was rough on the whole world. That's what I found too, that period, there was lots of turbulence, not just in the US, but everywhere. Things were realigning. And it's because that planet has returned, and now there's a new, topsy-turvy period. And if you look at the American problem at the time, and you were mentioning that this was sort of similar to Europe as well, there is this battle between the rights of the individual and uh, the idea that no, we shouldn't do that at all. We should allow slavery.
Whoever has the land and the money gets what they want.
Exactly, exactly. So then that conflict happens in the 1860s. And then, by the way, Uranus, we think about it, 84 years means 7 years per sign, 7
Mm-hmm.
times 12, right? So then, fast forward, what's the next time when Uranus returns? Second World War. Pretty clear, pretty clear. There had been a building, into what was really a fascist impulse.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like there were people then that thought this democracy thing is for the birds. We should have a king. In that case, it would be in the form of a Hitler, or the Japanese emperor was into it too, a
Hirohito.
Mussolini, centralizing the power that way. But once again, it's pushed back. And
Mm-hmm.
then the world goes from there. And by the way, it was pushed back by the great democratic powers at the
Mm-hmm.
time. That's what resisted that impulse. And now Uranus is returning. Again, it's just about to enter Gemini. In fact, shortly this summer, it'll do a period and into the fall, then backtracks again into Taurus for a bit, and then next year it goes into Gemini and it stays there until 2033 or so for
Mm-hmm.
that period, right? So you're seeing again another period which is turbulent for the whole world, not just for the US. There's a
Mm-hmm.
realignment that is, quite palpable. And then you can get into arguments about who started it, why is it caused. The planet doesn't care. It just
No.
produces the effect. And the thing is, these planets, it'd be so easy if you could say, this planet is this, and this, like put it in a box. It's that, and it's many other things that you start to notice as you observe, such as, for example, Uranus in its primary rulership from the beginning is connected to electricity. The discovery of electricity is what starts the Industrial Revolution. It makes it possible to do something
Mm-hmm.
like that. But look at where electricity has taken us. I mean, it keeps connecting all kinds of things, including in the modern era. Now, Uranus being electricity is also very technological. And so, technology itself, now we have AI, right? Where first of all, AI is heavily dependent on electricity, at least for now. And if it weren't that, it would be probably nuclear power, for which you would
Mm-hmm.
need plutonian type of energy. But it's the same thing. You need special energy to even have things like AI. And so uh, then it becomes an argument: is it good? Is it bad? Well, one answer is we're going to find out, I suppose. But the fact is, when you're in a period like this, it is to be expected that the world is in a adjustment phase, and it makes people really nervous. Yes, of course, because change is like that. When your life is changing for whatever reason, you don't know what the unknown holds. And the one thing I focus on is, I know Uranus is a democratic planet. I
Mm-hmm.
I know it's that. So then, in a way, I see this as currently it's a battle between Uranus and Pluto, because Pluto is the planet that we try to. And by the way, Pluto. I mean, think about the mythology. How brilliant this is. That what did Pluto? Pluto is Hades. What did he do? He abducted Persephone. He took her against her will
Right.
underground. It's a domination thing. This is what our current.
Yeah, but out of that domination thing was her mother going and getting Persephone out of hell and bringing
Uh-huh,
her back up so we can have spring and summer. Then hell
that's
gets
true.
her back and we have winter and fall if you live in the north
Okay,
or if
that's
you live
true.
in.
The thing is, myths are incredibly complex because you see all kinds of things where it looks this way, then it looks the other way. You have to extract the impulse, that fits something.
Mm-hmm.
Plutonian impulses are impulses to dominate,
Dominate.
and then yes, of course, because this is classic with many women, especially they experience a plutonian experience, something plutonian where a male tries to dominate them, and that's how they find their own power. They find
Mm-hmm.
something in themselves to resist. It's true. But here we've got Pluto in a battle with Uranus. In my opinion, Pluto doesn't stand a chance against Uranus. It already lost in the Second World War. It lost, well, in the a period of the Civil War, there wasn't as much Pluto, really. It was kind of in the background.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so my point being that even though it looks dicey at the moment, it looks scary, and many people are becoming, you know, uh, sometimes I think, wow, this is really negative. It's like you're just giving up. We're
Yeah.
lost.
There was a whole labor movement and it ended up being called the Luddites. But it's when industrialization came in, it was starting to tear the towns apart and
Hmm.
take the people's jobs away. The Luddites were the people that would break into factories and they would take sledgehammers and axes and break up all the machines. And it actually became a capital crime in England to break into factories and chew up machines. But
Right.
there were people then saying, no, 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 we have to go back to what we used to have. Well, it weren't going back there, guys, you know, but they had to go through that to see
Yeah,
what
it's
happened.
I mean, this is the thing. I mean, life is like this though. You get all kinds of things that they're not overall, they'll always have problems. I mean, you can uh, I'm sure write a book or even an encyclopedia on all the problems with electricity. I remember that I studied in my 20s. I learned a lot from Gurdjieff, this Armenian mystic who taught uh, a kind of really dynamic way to practice on the go, which I I learned a lot from. But he wrote that I remember reading it and going, "Wow, that's way out there." He said that uh, when man, extracted electricity from nature, he signed his own death warrant, or some such thing that was a really bad idea. But I mean, think about, then this would mean like, okay, let's take it out now. Turn on the lights. That's not going to happen. All kinds of things that we take totally for granted about our modern life, which you may then point to problems. Yes, that's true. But for example, go back to Middle Ages England or whatever, and they were dying of common bacterial diseases that now we've
Mm-hmm.
figured out. It seems like RFK is interested in bringing that back or whatever when he says crazy things like, according to RFK, the 1918 pandemic was caused by experimental vaccines. I mean, the man's a total crank. It's this idea that you go back to before we acquired knowledge, to make our way in the world,
Yeah.
So, and it's like, it'd be like the same thing if you say, well, okay, well, I don't like this and I'm really, really against AI. Well,
Mm-hmm.
maybe you are, and maybe AI will destroy us, but keep in mind that people are saying this about the radio, about the phone, when it came in, people were really suspicious of, oh my God.
Oh, you didn't live in the United States in the 60s, did you?
No, I did
Okay.
not.
That's when we had the guy who was the FCC commissioner who said that television was the death of the American brain.
Well, it
And
could
we
be,
didn't have Fox News, guys. I mean, it
right.
was just, and trust me, the stuff that was on TV was pretty bland, but it was people have always, and there's not only could they not stuff it back in the box, but I worked in broadcasting when we went from broadcasting to cable
Mhm.
and I remember having a professor say, cable's a lovely idea, but what material are you going to find to fill it? What are you going to put in it?
Well,
You know?
of course, that wasn't true, and so uh, it's just the way of the world, and you can find fault with it, or you can try to figure your way out, but it's pretty hard to argue that by and large it has benefited more people. That, in fact, is what democracy has done
Mm-hmm.
over the past, 250 years. More people are more free today. That's a fact. You
Mm-hmm.
can argue all you like. It's a fact. But is it perfect? No, it's not perfect. It's a continued experiment in a way. And we're always vulnerable, as you can see, to periods where people like our, orange maniac will emerge to try to do what previous maniacs were doing. But like someone said, I heard someone say this, which is really true. Now that people are saying, oh, this guy is a man of destiny. He's a man of,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, he is, but so was Napoleon and so was Hitler. But where does
Mm-hmm.
that end up?
So was
Man of destiny
Stalin. Jesus.
doesn't guarantee anything other than being, you're like there. But there's an argument to be made. Are you doing it, or is the universe using you for something?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, and that's what can, I mean, you need, uh, if you know your own patterns in your own life, because these planets operate within you too, change can be really hard. You can have periods where you can feel really lost and confused, and something didn't turn out, and later you look at it and say, oh yeah, that was perfect, it really helped me. Not when you were there. it was
No,
it was after that, right?
I've always told people if they could remember when they learned to walk, because I was in graduate school learning calculus the same semester as Sean, the one that's now on YouTube. You can see him. He was learning to walk, and I used to watch that poor kid pull himself up and try to take steps and fall back on his butt. And the more I watch, and he didn't get frustrated or angry. He was just like, "Oh, that happens. Well, what do I need to adjust?" That's the only reason I passed calculus, is because I figured if I at some point in my life had to work that hard to learn how to walk, and I can do it now, I could learn calculus. So I passed calculus, and obviously he learned to walk.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And that's the, I mean, it can be, yeah, it's threatening, it's problematic, it's the I wish there were an easier way to do it. Sometimes there isn't. You have to go through the the period in order to get to the other side, right? And this has
mm-hmm,
been my perspective. If you want to say that I'm too optimistic, I'm not saying it's easy, but if you look at look at the scenario we're in right now in the U.S. in particular. So uh, if you do the thought experiment and you and the election had happened in a different way, one result could have been a hot war because the right wing in this country is much more geared to that
Yeah,
kind
they
of
like their
behavior.
missiles.
Yeah, so that's one problem. Then you have the fact that elections tend to go back and forth in countries
Hmm.
that have good uh, democratic systems. Then it would mean in 28, which by the way, 28 is that's the return of Uranus to the US chart position. It's right there in 2028.
Hmm.
That's a change, new direction. New direction isn't the direction that is there
And
then, it's the new
it's
direction. Okay, so that should give you some optimism. But does that mean that in between then and now, you're going to be smelling roses? No, I don't think so. And we sure aren't, because we're having all kinds of, people are rightfully concerned. But that's the battle. That's what it is. That's, welcome to the world. The world is sometimes a beautiful, easy, peaceful place, and sometimes it's not. You have to, yeah,
I I don't think there's many times when you can say it was actually a big, beautiful place everywhere, and that's the
yeah,
problem.
that's true. That's
But
true.
when you look at how countries have adjusted and how they grew out of them, um, and one of the things that happened to England, we in Australia and Canada and South America and New Zealand were their safety valve. I mean, well, that's where half of the Irish population between 1850 and 1900 was halved. A lot of that was starvation, but that's how my grandmother got here. She was like, stay in Ireland and starve, or get on a boat that you probably didn't want to be on and go to Canada.
Hmm.
Um, we were kind of in those places. We're going to have to make those kinds of hard choices, and we can't always say, oh, it's going to be horrible, it's going to be awful. We just have to look forward, I think. I mean, I don't know how someone could live without having an optimistic point of view. Now, all of y'all, probably 99% of the people who watch this are going to live longer than I am just because I've just lived too long. But I haven't lived too long. Universe, I take that back. I like what I've got. Um, but you look at how these countries grew and the massive shifts they made. And you can also see where humans reached out to help other humans. A lot of the cities that industrialized, like around Manchester, the people who were building those factories also built housing for the people and built a place for them to come to. And the other consequence of them having jobs and jobs in factories meant that they put a lot of kids to work, but they also a lot of companies realized we have to have people who can read. So public education or some form of it in England became popular. It had always been here for the most part, even in the most rural areas. But over there, that was a big change that happened with them.
Hmm.
Um, but and then they finally came up with child labor laws, which was a very enlightening thing to do. But
Yeah,
that also meant that families, when they out in the farm, they just spit out as many kids as they could because they could always use them in the farm. When they were in the city, they couldn't use them because there were too many of them in a room. So people began to not have overly great numbers of families, and
right.
we
Yeah,
became aware of how those things worked. Whereas when we're all off in our own little village, we couldn't do that.
yeah, exactly. And the thing is that if a person hears that and they say, well, yeah, but child labor is bad, it even shows you the predatory impulse because that happens with human beings where, okay, you bring in Uranus, industrial revolution, electricity, but then people that run businesses, their impulse is, I'm going to take as much from you as I can and take more for
Right.
myself. That's human nature. But just look at where it ends up. The impulse is not just that, it's where it goes. And eventually you get labor laws, you get, as the years, unfortunately, they're not 1 or 5, sometimes it's 20 years, 40 years. It took a long time for people to only work 40 hours a week or, some level that is much less than it used to be. But that's the thing is it goes in that direction, meaning more people have more freedom, have more power, as individuals. I think now, for example, look at what's happening with the internet. I had to laugh. You know that he's a scientific, Isaac Asimov. He wrote a lot of science fiction. I remember that I would
Hmm.
see his books back in the 70s, things like that. And he was asked, I think in the 90s, somewhat, he was on Letterman or somewhere, and they were,
Hmm.
treating him as this visionary future or whatever. And the question was, what do you think? Is there something you see coming in the upcoming future? And he said, I think people are going to have their own TV station, which sounds preposterous unless you realize that that's in a sense what has happened. Now you've got many, 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 many voices with their own platform, and they can say this. Before it used to be Walter Cronkite, it was more limited, and that's all you'd have to hear. Now more people get to say more things. Now you can then say, well, that's a bad thing. Maybe we're going to find out. But overall, to me, it seems much better to have lots of voices than to have less voices. Because why? Because then you risk what's happening now, where the current administration is trying to reduce the voices as much as possible. They don't want people to say things, against their ideas, which is not good. Your volume is something happened to your volume. I think you muted yourself. Because I see it.
Is
Uh,
it back?
yeah, there, it's back. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you were
I was
saying.
muting because I have someone in the kitchen who's trying to do lunch.
Okay,
And so I was sort of like hoping y'all wouldn't listen to the microwave and everything else going on.
right.
But it's okay. I live in a house with people and I can't stop them from living here too.
Hmm. I understand.
So
Yeah.
how long people keep saying if you think this is freaking me out. They start in 2024. 2024 could be a very good year, a very bad year. Then it got to be 2025 and they said, "Oh my god, look at you." The clickbait they put on for their show titles just makes me nuts. And then now it's like, if you think 2025 has been bad, wait till 2026. Do you see do you see Gemini finally really going into Uranus really going into Gemini sort of being a breaking point for us?
Uh, well, not right away. This is why I've said, and to a lot of people, they just think it's never going to happen because what they'll ask, well, why are you talking about the midterm elections? These guys will make sure they don't happen, or they'll do something. Same with 2028. I'm not of that mindset, but to each his own. You're going to have to decide whether or not you're giving up. And
Mm-hmm.
and to me, if people remain steadfast in their point of view, their resistance, and they're determined to vote, that's what democracy is. You have to make yourself heard and show up to do it. And again and again and again, you see in elections that this is the key problem that causes parties to lose. Voters will just decide not to show up, or maybe they switch allegiances because they think something that's actually wrong. Like there were people in the recent election that were not either smart enough or informed enough to figure out that Trump doesn't know how to do economies. The fact that he had an economy in 2018 and 19 that was working pretty well is because Obama gave it to him. He didn't do anything. And by the way, his claim to fame was being a reality TV, showman pretending to be a businessman, because in the actual business world, he just bankrupted everything he touched. Anything
Mm-hmm.
he tried, either he bankrupted it or it didn't work. Steaks, airplanes, liquor, you name it. The whole thing is a scam, right? A word he likes to use. He's the biggest scammer, scoundrel I've ever seen in my life. But people kind of go, well, back then we didn't have inflation, which came in during the Biden period for all kinds of reasons that are really hard to stop, such as a pandemic that then brings in a huge influx of money. And then there's a lot of money around, prices are going to go up. It's economics 101. So they make this decision, and now we're here, but you can reverse. You can, and this, by the way, this is what happens. I mean, I don't know if you've noticed this pattern. It's pretty obvious. Who takes the heat? Whoever's in charge. So, you know, when he was in charge, people voted him out. You know why? Because they were seeing what he was doing and he was horrible. Remember
Mhm.
COVID? He was just unbelievably bad. So a lot of people came out, we got to stop this guy. Then they disappear into the background and they forgot, well, COVID, yeah, he was bad, but he was good economically and my prices are, I can't live like this. But what is he doing now? He doesn't care about prices, right?
Mhm.
Doesn't care one bit. In fact, he's making them worse. He's putting in tariffs to raise the prices. So I say focus, bring yourself back, make sure you stay aware because people like RFK, he's not very good at this. So,
What he's doing is going to cause a lot of real long-term problems, but he is cleaning out an agency that I kind of grew up in medicine and around medicine and drugs and stuff, and there's a lot of cleaning up that could have been done there, and I hope he does do it the right way. But
Mhm.
I don't think his little worm-eaten brain is functioning as well as it could.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, isn't one of the things, wouldn't you say that one of the benefits of this era that we're in, I think what it's done, the fact that this orange maniac has been running around in one form or another since 2016. He's been in our lives just persistently, either in charge or wanting to be in charge
Mhm.
and all this kind of thing. It's made people a lot more politically aware and active, which you should
Oh,
be. You should be paying attention to, otherwise they pass laws against you. You'll find out like, oh, they put it in the back of the bill there that you no longer can do X. Well, if you're aware and you make noise and you demonstrate and you call your senators and you raise money and you advocate and you vote, odds are good that you can hold a democracy, which is what democracy is. It's all of us.
well, we've seen it in Texas to some extent. I don't know what happened in other parts of the country, but we had school board elections about a month ago.
Hmm.
And a lot of those school boards that the a-holes with casseroles had taken over, the blonde bimbos that all wanted to close libraries and do everything that was very destructive. The school boards they took over all got one back to people who were really interested in educating the kids,
Hmm.
paying the teachers, keeping the schools open, having real libraries, having adequate after school programs, all the stuff those women were against. And it was not just kind of a little bit of a change, it was a resounding
Hmm.
Trump, tromping on them that they got. And the governor of our state, who's as retarded, well, he's Huckabee has passed child labor laws that we don't have in this state yet. So Arkansas, you're in worse shape than we are. But in Texas, our governor in the last week, they just passed an $8.6 billion money pot to go to public schools. Now, mind you, there's a whole lot of things behind that, but it's basically because they're scared. They understand, you know what? People are realizing my kid's coming home and they're dumb as a stump and they're dumber than when they got there in the first place. And so they wanted to change it. Now, $8.6 billion may sound like a whole lot if you live in Rhode Island or some of the smaller states or less populous states. When you spread that out across Texas, it works out to be about $55 a student per year.
Right.
So, but it's more, I mean, all they've done is take away from the school systems and they've gotten the message. The people are not happy. And a lot of local counties that I thought would never, never, ever, ever, ever switch are looking, bluer, or at least they're not voting for the people they used to vote for. And one thing that struck me, I grew up in Upper Illinois. I grew up in Northern Illinois. And I grew up in Joliet, and there's a town called Aurora that's right near us. Aurora was close enough to my hometown that I had teachers that used to commute in to Joliet from Aurora. It's that close. They created a line of people, each holding hands, from the city center of Aurora into the city center of Chicago. That's 40 miles over
Mhm.
bridges, over just down the highway, the whole thing. And that area is not a hotbed of liberalism, to
Mhm.
put it mildly, but the people have had it. And are you finding well, to some extent, our clients pick us, but I'm finding I've had a lot of clients coming to me and saying, my husband and I never thought this would happen to us. I mean, they say this in the chat and things. And I read this woman and I said, you and your husband lived in a bubble. You refuse to believe that these things could happen to you. She sent me back a long email and said, yes, we did. And I made him listen to your reading on us because it was absolutely spot on. And what I saw is he's not going to lose his job, but he thought he was going to get rift reduction enforced. And but there are a lot of people that are hurting, and you know, now everybody's going to know somebody who got hit like that. It's not just a theoretical, you know, weird book that someone's got out there about what they're going to do in 2025. They're going to try to really do it.
Yeah, well, that's the turmoil, that's the adjustment, that's the thing that we're going through. And you can either do your best to find your way out, or you can give up, I guess. It would be I'm
What
giving
if you
up in
give up?
part
What
or
do
in
you
whole.
get? You get nothing if you give up. And I'm not saying people should give up. I'm saying you shouldn't obsess on it every day, and you shouldn't say they're going to come get us. I'm going to tell you, the world has flipped on people before, and they
Yes,
ended up a great many of them walking out okay,
yes, that's the whole
or
idea. Is that
maybe going to a better place.
yeah, no, I mean that's the truth of it. That's what cycles reveal. And I don't think you have much choice, but you know, everybody has to decide for themselves. I mean, this is where you get into is your view of the world glass half full or glass half empty? And that's a mysterious thing. The way you grew up, your innate character. I mean, I see that in astrology. Is there too much Saturn? Is there too much Jupiter? Yes, it's true. But if you realize that even personally, if a person is glass half empty, their life tends to not work as well. You know, they if they tell themselves, "Oh, I'm really realistic and I like to mope a lot," this is not good. This is how you
Mm-hmm.
then, you know, in the so-called attraction principle, this is how you pull things toward you that are troublesome because you're telling the universe, I think this sucks. So the universe says, okay, if you think it sucks, let's do more of that. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you know, to see until you eventually
Well,
discover maybe I can stop uh, focusing in this way. I can change my focus. And I see lots and lots of within the lots of good things or encouraging patterns
mm-hmm.
within the overall period. Now, there's also a lot of negativity. So, for instance, on the one hand, take what he's doing with the judges. You can take the position that it doesn't matter what the judges do because the Supreme Court will always agree with him. That's not true. I haven't
No,
seen
they're
that every
not. They're
time.
not agreeing with them.
They're not agreeing with him. Uh, there's also he's trying to, you know, muscle in on the universities, but they're fighting back and they're going to court. And you know, he's creating a huge logjam, and that's our system. That's what we're in.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of saying, this guy is a genius, he's going to take it all down. He's not a genius. Is that news to you? No. That's one of the things that encourages me. This group of gangsters, they're not particularly smart gangsters. I mean, give
No.
them a plan. They're lazy, self important, narcissistic people like that FBI leader who looks like he escaped from an asylum. He looks like a
Mm-hmm.
total nut job. He's known for, you know, he conducted a raid. It was almost like a photo op, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I would be way more worried if you had like Hoover was a kind of a dicey guy, but he was serious. He was in the background.
Oh, J.
Doing,
Edgar Hoover. Yeah.
yeah, he was. Where to me, these people, you know, like same with Christy Noam, they're not really serious people. So in that sense, I'm more encouraged because they're less likely to come
Mm-hmm.
up with an actual plan that works. But am I saying it's an easy thing? No, it's not. It's
No, and it's
obviously
hard to watch.
no.
It's if you're smart
Yeah,
enough to realize what's going on, it's hard to watch.
it is extremely hard to watch. It's yeah, I mean, it's enraging. I saw yesterday his Truth Social thing on Memorial Day. He's calling people scum.
Mm-hmm.
The scum that did this and that. I mean, honestly, come on,
No, he's talking about the losers and the whatevers that don't like him. I
yes, right.
reposted that on my face page and said, proud to be a loser.
But I mean, what president? Can you imagine your leader presenting this kind of attitude? And the part that is most mind bending is people that say they're Christian. Really? This is your guy? I mean, honestly, I wish you'd have a little talk with Jesus because he would tell you, this is not
Hmm.
cool. There's no way. There's no excuse. None. I
No.
don't care what you tell me about that he put in judges that are against women's rights. It's more
Hmm.
than that. It's the cruelty, it's the stupidity, it's the inhumanity. So many things that should tell you, don't give people like this any traction. And they actually say, no, no, God put him there. Yeah, actually, I think God did put him there, but he put him there for a reason you haven't discovered yet, and you will. You will discover it
Yeah,
because,
and when the righteousness, if you've ever studied the judgment card in the tarot, when that judgment comes down, boy, they're gonna face it, you
yeah,
know.
but people like this, by the way, the people in history, the Napoleons, the Hitlers, the Trumps, their end is always very ironic. It always turns out to be the complete opposite of what they thought. They thought they had this thing, it's like, I mean, the extreme would be Mussolini. Look
Do you
up what
know?
happened to him,
Oh God, yeah, he
You want to know what
really.
happens? What can go wrong? Where the public is sort of on your side, but then it might go wrong. Be careful.
Napoleon died because of the wallpaper that was in his house. It had
Uh,
that green dye that killed him. He
didn't
died
he
of some
also,
poisoning.
Napoleon was, this is the Jupiter running amok in astrology where person has too much Jupiter. He opened too many fronts. He was this
Hmm.
brilliant tactician who suddenly lost his common sense and you open fronts everywhere. That's what Hitler did. He tried to fight the whole world at the same time. And then what he did is united the whole world against him. Right? And this guy
Hmm.
now, notice that he's doing a kind of a similar thing. I'm going to tariff everybody. Okay, but then they get together and they start buying somewhere else and they exclude you from the market. It's not a good plan. We live in a world. This is the thing too about, don't you think that it is global now? You can't escape globalism. The world is
No,
one now. You can't. And he's determined, I'm going to put up walls, to keep everybody just
yeah,
inside the
no,
US.
and trust me, we're not looking forward to our food prices here in Texas if he closes the Mexican border, because that's
I
where all our
know,
food comes from. I mean, a lot of it's grown in Texas. I'm not saying that, but
I know. And it's the people that have the
and
least money are the ones hurt the most because, even a
that's
$50,
why they go after immigrants and people who are only recently here.
yeah, yes,
That's an old history problem.
it's true.
Well, I don't know that we solved the world's problem, but I
No,
do hope people understands
I mean, look,
that.
I think when you said, to me, what encapsulated is when you said, I'm noticing some pretty interesting blue movement in the voting.
Hmm.
Focus on that. Okay. Have you
Right.
noticed that? Remember in 17, this is why politics is often, it's right in front, it's in your
Hmm.
face, it's front and center. In 2016, he comes in and immediately all the elections started to go blue and it's happening again.
Right.
Focus on that. Places like Nebraska, you get a guy who, or a woman or whatever that shouldn't
The
win there.
mayor of Omaha.
Okay, well, that should tell you something's happening. Focus on that and have hope and keep moving forward. We're going to have more elections. And this is the system. I mean, when people despair, I feel like asking them, like, what are you suggesting? Are you saying I should get an AR-15 and just go out the door and start shooting like in every direction? What's the solution here? Because I can't think of one other than stay in the system and do the best you can with it.
And look for where you can make a change where you
Yes.
are, because that's how Britain really survived the mass urbanization and all of the social upheaval. It was people who came in. There was a tailor. No, he was a cobbler. He had been a sailor and he was injured on a ship when he was 20, and
Hmm.
he had to become a cobbler because he couldn't use his legs. And he would open his cobbler shop every morning in this one city in England. There's a whole section of the town now. It's dedicated to this man. And he'd bring in the kids that were the street kids that had no place to go, that were part of it, and he would teach them their letters. And they said, well, I saw a documentary on it, and they said, well, in this little shop, what did he have? 10, 12 kids? They said he'd have 35 kids in an, I mean, he said they must have been hanging from the shelves. And they came in there, and eventually it so embarrassed the town's fathers, that they came in and said, well, we have to create an education system so these young people have a place to go. He could teach them to read because the pastor at his church had taught the kids at their church to read.
Yeah.
But it's things, And they were talking about the number of people that had gone on to Oxford and Cambridge and had become professors that came out of this weird little classroom during the industrialization. And I'm not saying you should open up your kitchen and string kids from the cupboards and teach them to read. I'm saying find something you can do and make phone calls. The phone calls really work. I've worked in politics and they pay attention to it. They always say, well, we're not hearing that. But if you do it through certain groups, they record that and they can go back to that congressman and say, oh no, we know you got this many phone calls this day.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
And
mean, that's
that,
the only
yeah.
way to make them accountable. And
Yeah.
I agree, they're a bunch of gutless wonders in DC.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. And it's between, if you take that and you blend it in with, at all costs, do your best to stay calm. It never helps to get anxious and nervous, and that is what leads to bad decisions, bad conclusions. Stay calm. So if you don't have anything you think you can do, first get calm and then see where that leads you into some kind of action. Just show up and do it. And if everyone in the democratic part of society, in this right now, it's the Democratic Party, clearly. If everyone or most people focus in that way, I think we're going to be fine. But does that mean that it's easy? No, it's not easy. No. I mean, it's very unsavory sometimes. You limit the news because if you watch too much news, yeah, I mean, like what we were saying, how you said, look what he said, what this guy is saying. I
Well,
mean,
I haven't heard his voice in so long and I don't want to. And I do try to follow things I think I could do something about. But
mhm,
I think that, like I told Andre, that's why I invited him to do this show. When I looked at the ultimate outgrowth of the Industrial Revolution and where it led England to, is a much more enlightened, much more caring, much more unified in some ways country. Obviously, get to Ireland, that's another thing.
mhm.
But um, the and the people there, they hold on to understanding the little pieces of their heritage that move them forward.
Yeah, exactly. That's the status that you can't, there's no perfection, but if you sense the overall pattern, I think there's good reason to have enough faith and belief to just keep moving forward. Glass half full all the time. It's really important,
Right.
personally and globally.
No,
That's
that's
like,
why I love talking to Andre and I like talking to him. This has been more of a political thing, but we're just talking about where the planets are setting the
mhm,
pieces up that we can all kind of universally
mhm,
see. But I want to give Andre a pitch. He's starting to look at tarot and astrology, and he and I were discussing it before the show. It'll be fascinating. I'll be
mhm,
following him on that. Not that any of my people don't already like and subscribe to Andre, but if you're some of Andre's people and you see me, like and subscribe to me, Nancy Jean Scarden. I work with this kind of stuff. I try to look at the world from a very different perspective. I work with elementals, which are the energies on this earth that went away during the Industrial Revolution. They didn't like it and they went away,
mhm.
but they're coming back, or so they tell me. And I work with crystals and try to help people learn how to empower their own life. And that's what's most important.
Mm.
And with that, I will let you go back to your tropical isle. Do you have anything you want to say in closing, sweetie?
Yeah, that's good. I think it was great talking with you, and I'm sure we can follow up at some point
Okay, we will.
because there's certainly no lack of you know interesting things happening at a pretty rapid pace. So yeah.
It's true. Okay, bye bye.
Right.
Have a good day.